So Timothy Bradley barely scrapes by Ruslan Provodnikov to retain his WBO welterweight title in a very wild and entertaining fight. I mean, entertaining is not a word you normally associate with Tim Bradley fights, but this was definitely an entertaining fight for the 50 or so people that actually turned up to watch it. I mean, Tim Bradley could not draw flies to shit, and this is an example of that. But it was an entertaining fight. Ruslan Provodnikov, to me, is a very one-dimensional fighter. He don't cut the ring off very well. He's got a poor defense. He's very limited in terms of his offensive skills. Don't cut the ring off well. But yet, as limited as he is, he was able to catch Tim Bradley with more clean punches and hurt him more often than Manny Pacquiao was. He was able to do much better against Tim Bradley than Alexander, Abregu, or Peterson did. Now, why is that? Does that mean that Provodnikov is better than Alexander, Peterson, or Abregu? Hell no, not in my opinion. Does that mean that Provodnikov hits harder than Manny Pacquiao, or he's more accurate than Pacquiao? Is that why he was able to catch and hurt Bradley more often than Pacquiao was? No, not in my opinion. I just think that Bradley fought a terrible fight. Was it ring rust? Possibly. Was it a poor choice of tactics? I think it was more that. I think it was a case of a poor choice of tactics on Bradley's part. He wasn't listening to his corner. His corner were telling him to box from the outside. Apparently that was their plan from the very beginning, to box Provodnikov on the outside. Bradley didn't listen to his corner. I think the reason he didn't listen to his corner was because of all the criticism he's been taking, especially over the last year or so, about his punching power. I spoke about it in my pre-fight prediction video, which I uploaded Saturday morning. I said that I predicted Bradley to win a 12-round decision, but I also said that Bradley may look bad in this fight. Yeah, don't be surprised if Bradley looks bad in this fight. And I also said that Bradley may come into the fight with a chip on his shoulder, like Amir Khan, trying to prove that he can punch hard. And the worst thing you can do against a guy like Provodnikov, who's very limited, all he has is a big punch and a good chin, right? The worst thing you can do against a fighter like that, if you're not a big puncher yourself, is to go toe-to-toe with them early in a fight when they're fresh. That's the worst thing you can do. I mean, tactically, it was the dumbest thing Tim Bradley could have done. And he nearly paid for it on several occasions. I think Tim Bradley, the damage was done early in this fight, because Bradley was outboxing Provodnikov quite well in the first minute and a half or 2 minutes of the first round. And then Provodnikov, he caught Provodnikov with a pretty decent shot. And then rather than going back to his boxing, because Provodnikov wasn't hurt, so rather than going back to his boxing, he instead, rushed after Provodnikov and tried to force a knockout when the knockout wasn't there. You understand? And in the process, he ended up getting caught himself and nearly knocked out himself. I mean, the amount of times that Tim Bradley was hurt in this fight was unbelievable. The amount of times that he was on the brink of getting knocked out cold was incredible. If this wasn't a world title fight and it had been a different referee, this fight may well have been stopped on several different occasions. And you couldn't have really argued if the fight had been stopped on a few different occasions, because Bradley was so badly hurt. He was so badly out on his feet. It was incredible. It was a really terrible performance by Bradley, and probably the worst I've ever seen him fight. Yeah, worst I've ever seen. I don't know if it was just ring rust or if it was just the fact that, Provodnikov hurt him early and Bradley's reflexes never really returned. Bradley's legs pretty much returned to 90% of what they would have been had he not got hurt in the first 2 rounds. So he pretty much had legs to move, but I don't think his reflexes were quite there. I think he stayed pretty much groggy throughout most of the fight because of the damage that he took in the first 2 rounds, which was tremendous damage. Provodnikov obviously hits very hard. Bradley does take a good shot, and he has been down before, but I've never seen him hurt the way that he was hurt against Provodnikov. Now, people are saying that Bradley had to lose 40 pounds coming into this fight, and obviously he's coming off a long layoff. All those things may be factors, but I think the biggest single factor is the fact that he just boxed with a chip on his shoulder, and he boxed a dumb and stupid fight. Now, there's a lot of Bradley critics out there who say Bradley can't box, who say that he's overrated, who say that, he just gets by on heart and determination. Well, in this fight, he certainly needed a lot of heart and determination. But the fact remains that he has boxed very well in other fights. He outboxed Luis Abregu, right? You go and watch that fight. He didn't brawl with Abregu or anything like that. He outboxed him. Same goes for the Lamont Peterson fight. He outboxed Lamont Peterson. Even though he was under intense pressure from Peterson, he outboxed him and countered him and all those kind of things. Obviously, Peterson don't hit as hard as Provodnikov. But my main point is Provodnikov's pressure was not that effective, to the point where Tim Bradley had to stand and trade with him, from what I could see, right? Because even after Bradley had been hurt, like in the middle rounds, just by sticking and moving, he was able to stay out of the way without too much problem, and he was able to land his jab very clean on Provodnikov and bust him up. You know what I mean? He was busting him up with that jab. It was landing very clean. Provodnikov don't have a good defense, so if Bradley had just stuck to sticking and moving in the first few rounds, busted Provodnikov up, he could have just won the fight on cuts or something like that, maybe by the 8th or 9th round without getting involved. Right, but he wanted to prove himself, just like an Amir Khan, and he nearly got himself knocked out in the process. So he, as much as I've said in the past, Tim Bradley's a smart fighter, which he has been in previous fights, very smart. He's boxed smart fights, like against Abregu, Peterson, Junior Witter. In this fight, he was definitely not smart. He boxed about as dumb as he could possibly box, and his trainer must be furious with him after this one. You know what I mean? Because literally, this very limited fighter in Provodnikov nearly knocked him out on several occasions. And like I said, I think that a lot of the fighters that Tim Bradley's already beaten would beat Provodnikov without too much problems, in my opinion. But if he fights them, then we'll see whether what I'm saying has any validity to it. But that's just how I feel. I feel like someone like Alexander would beat the shit out of Provodnikov. I think Maidana's a lot better than Provodnikov, and you saw what Alexander did to Maidana. But nonetheless, Tim Bradley goes forward from this. Very poor performance, but he goes forward from this, and there's probably more fight opportunity. The irony is there's probably more opportunities for a big fight now for Tim Bradley after he looks so vulnerable in this fight. Apparently, Bob Arum wants to set up some kind of informal, unofficial tournament, top-ranked tournament, where he's going to match Bradley, Marquez, Pacquiao, and the winner of Rios Alvarado together in some kind of tournament. Now, obviously this was a poor performance from Bradley, but a lot of these fighters now are going to be much more willing to fight him, especially someone like Marquez, right? And I've said all along, I believe Bradley beats Marquez. I believe he can outpoint him, and I stand by that, right? I'm going to go on record right now, right? So come and hit me over the head if Bradley ends up getting knocked out by Marquez. But I think Bradley will outbox Juan Manuel Marquez. I know on the evidence of this fight that seems crazy, because he nearly got knocked out by someone who, on the surface of it is nowhere near as good as Marquez. But styles make fights. Marquez is not a pressure fighter. Right? He's not going to put Bradley under pressure. He's not going to come forward and do all that kind of stuff. He doesn't have that kind of volume. He doesn't have that kind of youth to be able to box the way Provodnikov did. I think Bradley will outbox Marquez. That's just my personal opinion. I could be wrong, but that's how I feel. I feel like he's got the movement, the jab, and the boxing ability to just outbox Marquez. And now we might get to see the fight anyway. You know what I mean? Bradley looked terrible in this fight. He looked very vulnerable. He looked very beatable. And we may see him fight Marquez. We may see him fight a Rios Alvarado winner or a rematch with Pacquiao. All interesting fights. But I would still rather see Bradley down at 140 pounds, which I think is his more natural weight. Even though Provodnikov was a small guy himself, he was not a big guy. I prefer to see Bradley down at 140 pounds. I know that those guys are all golden boy fighters at 140 pounds, but look, last year Martirosyan fought Lara. That was golden boy fighter against a top ranked fighter. If Bradley can maneuver himself into the number one position at 140 pounds, right, he can force a fight with any of those guys. In boxing, things like rival TV networks and rival promoters, those things only get in the way if one of the fighters don't want to fight. If two fighters really want a fight to happen, the fight will happen. You understand what I'm saying? Everything can get worked out. If there's enough money on the table, any fight can be made. Right? If there's desire for it to happen from both fighters and both sets of promoters. So me personally, I'd rather see him back down at 140 pounds, which I've been saying loads of times in my recent videos. But you know, he'll probably fight one of the top ranked fighters, like I just mentioned, either Pacquiao, the Rios Alvarado winner, or Marquez. You know what I mean? So you know, we'll see how that goes. Obviously, a lot of people are definitely going to be on this video saying, "Oh, Hatman, all the stuff you said about Bradley being underrated is bullshit. He's clearly overrated." But like I explained very clearly in that video, I don't use the terms overrated and underrated the same way other people use them. Normally, when people use the term overrated, they're saying that someone is rubbish. Yeah, when they say that, oh, this fighter is overrated, like you know, Amir Khan's overrated, they're basically trying to say that Amir Khan's shit. But when I say overrated, I'm not saying a fighter is shit. All I'm saying is a fighter is not as good as the majority of the boxing public believe them to be. That's what I'm saying by overrated. And the same goes for when I'm saying a fighter is underrated. I explained very clearly in the Tim Bradley video that I did that when I say Tim Bradley is underrated, I'm not saying that he's the best in his division. I'm not saying that he's the best pound for pound. I'm not saying that he's a flawless fighter. All I was saying when I said Tim Bradley was underrated is that he's better than the majority of the public give him credit for. And that is 100% true. Because if you look at who he's fought and what he's done, you know, in his last 5 fights before this fight, he'd beat 3 undefeated fighters in 5 fights. He outboxed Peterson, he outboxed the Abreu. That's right, he outboxed the Abreu. Go and watch the fight, I'm not lying. He outboxed him. Tim Bradley is capable of boxing a good disciplined fight and having good boxing skills and counter punching and all those kind of things when he chooses to do so. It just so happens in this fight with Provodnikov, he let all that shit go out the window and he fought like an idiot tonight. You know what I mean? So he's definitely not going to win many more believers. But he's definitely capable. As he showed in spots in this fight that he's definitely capable of sticking and moving and, you know, boxing quite well with a nice jab and movement, etc., etc. But yeah, like I said, it was a poor performance from Bradley. But you know, the irony of it is that he may get more fights, more big fights off the back of that poor performance. You know what I mean? He may get that. So anyway, that's how I felt about it. It was an entertaining fight, which is what, you know, people wanted at the end of the day. People wanted an entertaining fight out of Bradley, so they got it this time. Shout out to Skylar Berman. Shout out to Neil Gordon. I know he's one of the big Tim Bradley critics, and he's gonna have a lot to say on this one. So shout out to Neil Gordon, man. Miss Neil Gordon out there in Facebook land. So yeah, shout out to everyone who watched the fight. This is Hatman. Leave your comments in the comment section below. I'm out.